Hey guys, welcome back. I think this one's going to be slightly more of an informal video. I'm not really sure how I'm going to do this, but the idea of this, I've had this idea for a little while now where kind of just each month just going to be looking over everything I've read and do kind of almost a mini book review for the month. I guess for me, it's kind of a good way for me to consolidate everything I've read, go over, make sure it kind of actually sinks in, and even some of the stuff that I've learned from there, some of the stuff I've been implementing. And yeah, I thought I'd just kind of put that in a video, almost do a little series, so I can kind of recommend, give my thoughts, opinions, which hopefully might be helpful for someone out there if they're on the fence about getting a book, wanting to read more, whatever. But yeah, as I said, it's kind of a very open-ended, informal thing. Yeah, and might as well just hop straight into it. So the first book I read this month was Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. I'm sure probably a decent number of people will have heard of Jocko Willink, kind of ex-Navy SEAL, got his own podcast, tough as nails kind of bloke. The kind of general premise of the book is both of those two talking about their time in the Navy SEALs and some of the key principles that they picked up along the way. And most of these kind of refer to leadership and self-discipline. Some of my personal key favourite takeaways from the book were the kind of introspective perspective that they look at. As the title suggests, it's the extreme ownership where you always are looking for where you could have done that bit better, where your fault is in a certain thing, and what can you constantly look to improve upon. Other aspects were kind of takeaways that are kind of the simplest plans, simplest explanations generally are the best. So I guess it's kind of like that Occam's razor sort of thing. Another great one, there's no such thing as bad teams, there are only bad leaders. From a personal perspective, I've kind of already found myself being doing these sorts of things for the last few years, but I think it really kind of stepped up the level of quite how much ownership you have to take. I'd recommend this as a read for almost anyone, especially people in positions of leadership or people aspiring to be in positions of leadership, and anyone kind of in the self-improvement sphere or wanting to improve themselves. It is a brilliant read. The second book I read was Someday is Today by Matthew Dicks. I might be wrong, but I believe it's only fairly recently been released. It's an incredibly engaging and well-written book. Matthew Dicks has written many books over the years, and not just in this sort of sphere, just on everything. I think he's written some fiction. I don't really know, to be honest. I probably need to do more research on that, but it was a very different feeling self-improvement, self-help book to many that I've read, and it had this sort of quite humane aspect to it, which was quite different. I found it really quite wholesome and a fulfilling read. Some of my key takeaways from this, he hammers on about kind of the perspective of seeing himself as 100 years old or there and abouts on his deathbed, which I find is a really interesting perspective to look at your life through. He also hammers home about saying yes to any creative opportunities that come your way, basically saying that you never know where they're going to lead, and also you can always say no a few days down the line if it really does not align with where you want to go. He had several other kind of small little tips and tricks here and there, which I found to be really interesting, as well as covering a lot of the main general things that get covered in most of these self-help books. Overall, I would recommend this to pretty much everyone. I thought it was a brilliant book, a really easy read, and yeah, I think everyone could benefit from reading this book. So the next book I read was No Excuses by Brian Tracy. This is probably one of the most comprehensive self-help books I've ever read. It's not necessarily the easiest read, it's very information dense, very activity dense, but does cover an incredible range of areas and topics. To be fair, I did find it a bit of a tough read. It was very information heavy and not the most engaging. However, it covered so many great bases. It's something that is worth a read, even if you don't necessarily actively engage in all of the activities that he recommends. It can be perfect for a sort of handbook or even kind of a checklist to see where you are along your self-help journey. It's one of those ones I'd recommend just to read in general, just to see kind of where you're at. Another big bonus, and kind of the reason I did end up reading it, was that it was free on Audible. So you don't really have an excuse not to read it, to be honest. Being such a comprehensive self-help book, it covered a lot of the things that most self-help books cover. Although there were a few extra elements which I'd never heard before, but actually really liked. My favorite being the 3% rule, in which he basically recommends or states that all successful people spend at least 3% of their earnings on improving themselves in some sort of way, whether that be buying books, buying a course, all that sort of stuff. He also speaks about the benefits of good relationships, which is not often covered in self-help books. I'd recommend this to anyone looking to improve themselves, whether that be in their career, personally, whatever. As I said earlier, I'd probably use it more as a handbook. It would be really good for beginners to read as a holistic eye-opener to all the different aspects within self-improvement and kind of just a life's journey. But as it covers so many topics, I personally wouldn't necessarily take all of the actionable advice, and maybe if you find one section that you are interested in, find a book that focuses more specifically on that area of interest. I think, in my experience, having read some of those, they give just more in-depth, detail, well-worked advice. But overall, I would recommend it to most people. The next book I read was Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. If you've watched my previous video, you'll know that I've already made a video on this incredible book. Incredibly informative. I don't go into anywhere near the detail he does in his book. Really goes into depth about the science around sleep. I won't go into too much detail about my own personal takeaways from this, as I've already made a video about it, but one of the main things was simply just the importance of sleeping. One of the big ones actually, which I didn't mention in my video, was that humans are naturally diurnal, which means that actually taking a nap after lunch can be a particularly healthy thing to do. I'd have to recommend this to absolutely everyone. Everyone needs sleep. Everyone could benefit from a great night's sleep. So there's no one out there who shouldn't read this book. The next book I read was The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson. It is an absolute classic. I mean, I've heard about it for years, but had never got around to reading it. But as soon as you read it, you understand why it's a classic. It's a very entertaining and engaging book. He certainly has his own style of writing, which is very entertaining. It is overall kind of a self-help book. Again, some of the key elements of this book are on perspective, in terms of, you know, how you view life and what angles you view life at, and how you determine success, and how those can actually really kind of act as massive knock-on impacts to help improve certain aspects of your life. I personally found it incredibly useful for myself in terms of how I valued success, and I realised that actually I think for quite a long time what I valued success-wise was really actually not healthy for me. So I found it to be incredibly useful already. Again, I would recommend pretty much everyone to read this. I think it can massively help with people's mental health, and especially if you're looking to improve yourself, self-improvement journey, it is a must read. Next book is Mastery by Robert Greene. If you're at all familiar with Robert Greene's books, he has got just a series of absolute classics, and so far this, I would have to say, is the best one I've read. It is incredibly well written, very engaging, and kind of all the examples are really wide ranging and just interesting, to be honest. Fundamentally, this book, as you might have guessed from the title, is about mastery and how you develop that, the ways to go about it. Everything's covered in this book. It's incredible. Some of the key takeaways is learning is more important than earning. Another one is you have to reframe how long you think it's going to take to reach the level of mastery, and he said it's going to be at least 7 to 10 years. There's several other interesting tips like working with your hands, visualization. I won't go into all of them, you can read the book for that. I would recommend this to anyone who wants to be successful in anything they want to do. It really lays out what is required and sort of a roadmap of how you can go about achieving that success. The final book I read this month was $100 Million Offers by Alex Hormozi. If you don't know Alex Hormozi by now, you've been clearly living under a rock. The guy is just a fucking beast and just unbelievably intelligent. You know, I'd seen him on YouTube for honestly ages, never really watched that much of him. I've got far more into him last few months, but you know, again, he basically gives this book away. I think I got it on Kindle for 99p. So there's absolutely no excuses not to get yourself a copy of this. The book itself is so unbelievably well written, really concise, informative, and is full of incredibly useful, actionable advice. For me personally, some of the stuff in the book is not yet quite applicable to where I'm at on my entrepreneurial kind of journey, but it's been incredibly eye-opening to read the book and see kind of some of the steps required. You know, some of the kind of key takeaways I got from this is kind of just his ways in approaching all aspects of sales and business. His use of divergent thinking I thought was incredibly interesting, and some of the kind of tips and tricks that he uses are so kind of just interesting and eye-opening. I'd recommend this to anyone who's interested in starting a business or is an entrepreneur already. I know myself personally, I'm probably going to use this as sort of a handbook in ways, kind of help guide myself through it, and I'm pretty sure even Hormozi himself speaks about, he kind of uses it as a handbook himself. So if he uses it, then it must be good. Thanks once again for watching. I have no idea if that was at all interesting or helpful. I mean, let me know in the comments if you did find that interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think my personal kind of goal with this was to kind of not necessarily hold myself accountable, but to make sure I'm reading plenty, consolidating my knowledge, and in fact I'm looking to read even more. I kind of started this idea partway through February, so I had closer to about 3 weeks reading time. But yeah, no, I'm looking to really up the amount I read and just kind of absorb as much information as possible. And the most humbling things about kind of this month so far, although I've read so much more than I have done like in the last few years, in this month alone pretty much, it's quite humbling to see and realise kind of how little I seem to know. But I'm collecting quite a good wish list on Audible, so I don't think I'll be running out of books anytime soon. Yeah, please leave a like, any comments, any improvements, or any videos that you're interested in seeing from me. I will appreciate all of those. And yeah, until next time.